All right, let's get started. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our MDA Advocacy Institute Government Shutdown, What You Need to Know. We're really happy you're here to join us to learn a little bit about what might be going on over the next few days. My name is Mark Fisher. I'm the Director of Advocacy Engagement here at MDA, and we're here to talk about a topic we've never talked about with folks before, which is what will happen if the government does shut down, and what would that mean for maybe you and your family. So let me say at the outset, we really hope it doesn't. None of us here want the government to shut down at all. We really hope Congress can work together to find a way forward, but there is a possibility that it might happen. So we wanted to talk with everyone today about what that could mean, especially for some things that you might be thinking about right now. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Um, I'm going to go a little bit about what we're talking about the agenda today. So first, I'll start off talking about what the heck's going on Capitol Hill right now. What are the political dynamics? Why are we in this position to begin with? And what would a governor shutdown actually mean? Then we're going to go dive down into three topic areas that we think will be the most important to this community, which is what would be first the impact on the Food and Drug Administration if the government does shut down. We'll talk about drugs and research, on COVID research, maybe pandemic readiness. We'll be talking about what it means for the FDA. The second topic we'll be talking about is what would the impact on the National Institutes of Health be? So on clinical trials, medical research, and their workforce. And then the third thing we'll talk about is the impacts on benefits and federal programs such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and things around the Inflation Reduction Act. So we think those would be kind of the key topic areas that many folks might be the most interested in learning about what might happen if the government shuts down. If you're interested in joining our grassroots advocacy network, I highly encourage it. I see so many new faces on the call today, which we welcome. You can do that two ways. You can go to mda.org/advocacy and sign up, or you can text MDA USA to 50457. We would love to have you. If you need closed captioning, there is a button on the bottom left hand of your screen, the little closed captioning button. You may click that and the closed captioning should pop up for you. Throughout the presentation, we definitely welcome your questions, and you can do that via the Q&A box. It's a little difficult to find, but if you see three little dots next to the chat bubble, you can click those three little dots and the Q&A box will pop up and you can insert your question there. If you put it in the chat bubble, that's fine too. We will find it. But if you want to submit your questions, you can find the Q&A box down there. First, before I begin, I want to introduce our awesome panel for you tonight. We have some amazing speakers. The first one is Stephen Grossman. He's the Executive Director of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA. In his role, Stephen Grossman is a policy and regulatory consultant whose experience covers all areas of public health and the FDA. He's the executive director and co-founder of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA, a 150-member stakeholder coalition that advocates for increased resources for the FDA. The Alliance also educates policymakers, media, and the public about the agency's mission and responsibilities. Prior to becoming a consultant and association executive, Mr. Grossman spent a decade in public service. So we found the perfect person to talk to us about FDA. We're also joined by Grace Kransover. She is a senior policy associate at CRD Associates. Grace is a legislative strategist with experience working on policy and regulatory issues related to the physician payment, increasing and protecting access to care for women and transgender patients, and drug pricing. Additionally, Grace has extensive experience navigating the federal appropriations process to advocate for increased funding for medical research and other public health programs. Before joining CRD Associates, Grace advocated on behalf of members of the Endocrine Society and people with Parkinson's disease at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. We're also joined by Joel Kartner. Many of you who have come to our advocacy institutes know Joel very well. He is our Director of Access Policy. He'll be co-moderating this with me tonight. So with that, we want to talk a little bit about what's going on right now in Capitol Hill. Before we dive into how it could affect folks on the call, what in the world is going on right now? And I tried really hard to find a way to talk about what's going on, and I found my favorite emoji to help me, which is this. We're not quite sure what is going on right now on Capitol Hill, but I will do my best to talk about what the political what's going on up there right now, to the best of my ability, knowing in a couple days or a couple hours it could be a little out of date. So the too long I didn't read version is government funding ends at 12:01 a.m. on Sunday. So when we wake up Sunday morning, if they have not funded the government by then, you'll see kind of a government shutdown or a partial shutdown. Things will start to close down if the government can't get their act together and fund the government by 12:01 a.m. on Sunday. And what's a little unique about uh, this scenario than what we've seen in the past is the US House and Senate are not really working that well together at this point. Normally by now, when we're getting to the end of a government funding deadline, and usually the major players are in a room talking, whether it's the leaders of the Senate, the House, the president, trying to get a deal so we don't shut down. That's not really happening right now. The Senate is kind of working on its own thing, hoping the House will adopt it and vice versa. They're kind of operating on a little bit of different planets right now. And that's why we think a government shutdown is looking more likely than not, because the House and the Senate just are acting a little differently than they normally do when they're facing this situation. Again, we don't want them to shut down. No one does, but it's looking more likely than not at this point because the House and Senate are just not seeing eye to eye. So let's focus on the Senate. What is the Senate doing? And this is a slide I had to edit a few times today because things are ever changing. At this point, they are still working to pass a short-term funding bill over the weekend. They won't. That means a bill to just buy them some more time until they can resolve their differences with the House and pass a bill for the rest of the year. So they're still working to pass that short-term bill. It also can be called a CR or a stopgap bill, just to buy them some more time. And and in that bill, they're trying to figure out what else they might add to the bill to get other folks to vote for it. We think at this point their version will extend funding through mid-November. Still unsure. That's what we think at this point. It could be longer, could be shorter. And they're still debating at this point what extra stuff they want to add into it to entice people to vote for it. They might be adding Ukraine funding or disaster funding. That's up in the air whether they want to do that or not. They might extend the authorization of the FAA for a few weeks, a few weeks or 4 months. That authorization is also lapsing in a few days. That is another issue that MDA cares very deeply about, which could be a whole nother webinar. But they're working on maybe putting a little reauthorization timeline in there to get people to vote for it. This morning, this is the new thing. They might add some border security measures to this small bill to get some House Republicans to vote for it. But this is all up in the air right now. And the supporting and timing is pretty unclear. Um, you know, they're trying to get as many senators to vote for this as possible to be bipartisan. They're trying to find the right mix of things for that to allow that to happen. But the timing is unclear. Um, I'm hearing now the earliest they might be able to vote on something is Sunday or Monday. I will leave them to decide that timing, but it's looking kind of interesting on the Senate side. And saying that, would the House even pass anything the Senate does? If would they even pass a short-term bill to fund the government? That's looking a little unlikely at this point. So the Senate still has to decide what it wants to do. The House is also a little bit in disarray right now. Again, the too long didn't read version is the House GOP is not on the same page. They have a lot of strife over there, which is delaying what they want to do to fund the government. And there's some sticking points they're trying to resolve. First, the Republicans have a very slim majority in the House. It's about 4 or 5 seat majority that they have in the House. What that means is it doesn't take a lot of people to hold things up. It won't take many Republicans to go against their leadership to stall a bill. And that's what they're facing now is there are some holdouts on the Republican side that don't want to vote for much at all right now relating to funding or not enthralled by a short-term bill, that they're threatening to vote no. And if the Democrats join them, then nothing passes the House. So the GOP has a very slim majority, which is hurting them. And there's lots of disagreements within that caucus. There are many folks, and by many I mean 5, 6, 7, or 8 or 10, but when you have such slim majorities, it matters that refuse to vote for a stopgap bill. They refuse to vote for a temporary funding bill. They just do not want to vote for a bill that kicks the can down the road, which again is what the Senate is working on as we speak. Um, so there's disagreements with that. There are disagreements of what they should or should not fund in their version of the bill. Should they what should they should they fund Ukraine? Should they fund disaster relief? Should they defund agencies if they don't like the work they're doing? They can't agree among themselves what they want to do with funding, so that's a sticking point. What is the total funding amount they want to do? They haven't resolved what is the overall budget that they want to pass through the House. They can't agree on that. And again, this is all internal Republican disagreements. I'm not even talking about Democrats at this point. And then speaking of Democrats, there's a sticking point of how much Democratic support should they try to get on this. You might be saying, Mark, if there's only 5 or 6 Republicans causing havoc, why can't they just get 5 or 6 Democrats to join them and pass something through the House? Well, the answer is they could. But the major sticking point is if that happens, the speakership of the current speaker, Kevin McCarthy, could be in trouble. Uh, there, it takes only one Republican in the House to put a motion on the floor to remove Kevin McCarthy as speaker, just one. And if there are certain Republicans who'd be upset that they would work with the Democrats to pass something, they could put that motion on the floor to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. And if all the Democrats join, well, it takes a few more Republicans and Kevin McCarthy's out. And that is hanging very heavily over the speaker's head right now. So he's very reluctant to do anything with the Democrats right now because he's nervous his speakership might be in trouble. Another complicating factor is earlier this year, when the United States almost defaulted on its debt, but at the last minute it was averted, which was fantastic. But to avert that, they had a deal about what the funding level should be right now, about what we should be working on right now. What's the budget agreement right now? Well, that deal with President Biden, there's certain that was supposed to be in place, should have made this process easier, but there are certain Republicans who didn't like that deal and don't want to abide by it. So that's causing some problems. And again, whatever they pass through the House, remember the Senate's Democrat controlled, so probably won't pass there. So it's a lot going on right now, which is why Congress is kind of stalled. So what actually happens in a shutdown? Well, we want to talk about this before we go into the specifics, because if we wake up tomorrow on Sunday morning and they didn't pass anything, the country doesn't go into chaos. Core workers and agencies will show up. They will, if they're deemed essential or the House deems them essential, they will show up. They will do their job. The caveat is they do it without pay, which is not exciting for them at all, or anyone that would happen to. But core workers at the beginning will show up. Non-essential workers will be furloughed, though, which is very unfortunate. That just is not good for the agencies. It's not good for staffing levels. But essential workers will show up. So your TSA agents will show up at the beginning. Your air traffic controllers will be required to work. Anyone deemed essential will work. So the country will not be in chaos if we wake up on Sunday and they have a funding agreement. But there are slow moving consequences that we could start to see. Customer service, government customer service could start to decline as the longer this goes. You can imagine, skeleton crew manages these agencies. The longer they go working without pay, they just might not show up anymore. And we saw that before in earlier government shutdowns where TSA agents just wouldn't show up because they weren't getting paid to do their job. And you could see that happening in other agencies as well. We could see delays on much progress. Any new projects probably can't happen. Any new regulations probably can't be released. Government kind of starts to slowly shut down, and customer service gets worse. It just as longer this goes, the worse this gets for the American people. And of course, Congress grinds to a halt until they figure this out. So any bills that we want to pass that we've been working on for a long time just grind to a halt until this happens. And of course, there's economic consequences. If you're a worker who might get furloughed, you're not going to be spending a lot of money anymore because you don't know when your next paycheck is. If you are working, but you are working without pay, you also might not be spending as much in the economy just because you're not sure when your next paycheck are. If you're a government contractor, same thing for you. You might not be. So there's a lot of folks that could be affected that could have economic consequences. So is a shutdown imminent? We hope not, but it's seeming very likely at this point, unfortunately. I have a few screenshots on the screen there. There's some bets going on in the Senate about how long it's going to happen. The U.S. government has started notifying federal employees that this could happen because there's some key questions that we still don't know the answers to, which is can anything pass the U.S. House anymore? We're just not sure. We're hearing that members of Congress are already trying to get out of the shutdown before it happens. So they're not trying to prevent it; they're trying to get out of one when it does happen. So that's concerning. What role will the Democrats play? We're not quite sure, especially in the House. Will Kevin McCarthy, eventually have to have Democratic support to get something out of the House. We'll have to see. And then how long will shutdown last? Your guess would be as good as mine. So again, we want to give this little primer of what's going on, just so folks are aware. Again, we hope a shutdown does not occur, but we're preparing in case it does. And with that, I'm going to turn over to both Stephen and Joel to take on the next part of our conversation about how individual agencies that we think this community would care the most about might be impacted. So, Stephen, I'm going to turn it to you. Joel, I'll turn it to you as well. But, Stephen, the floor is yours. Oh, Stephen, you're on mute. Oh,
Can I be heard?
very loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay. If you can pull up the emoji from the beginning of your presentation, I would tell you what it really means. I don't know if that's technically feasible. It's a very nice presentation, and it is complicated, and it's more complicated because a lot of people are caught up in narrow interests and narrow political considerations, and the prime topic should be what's good for the country, and that's not what is being discussed. I kind of saw your emoji and I was thinking, oh, that's the emoji for, are there any adults in the room? And that's what it feels like. There are a couple of, before I jump into FDA, there are a couple of things I think are worth mentioning here. The shutdown will occur in stages. Uh, Nobody is going to be affected on Sunday because pretty much anybody who's required by the federal government to work on Sunday qualifies as an essential person. They're taking care of animals and research, they're taking care, they're guarding buildings. And so everybody who's working Sunday is going to be unaffected. So the real deadline for the shutdown is probably about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday, when the Office of Personnel Management has to tell federal workers whether to report. Now, most years that's important. This time, I don't think an extra 24, 25 hours is really going to make any difference to Congress. They are indeed talking different languages, and the consequences are pretty great, which is my cue to jump into the FDA. It's a mixed story. Let's say that the agency will have its major functions running, uh, but even the major functions that are guaranteed because they have advanced appropriations, they have no year money, they have user fees, the programs that cannot be cut because they're urgent, essential to human health and safety. All of those that are funded are still going to be short personnel. And that's something that not a lot of people are talking about. So, yes, the review of product approvals will continue for either for new drug applications or BLAs, biologic license applications, for which user fees have been paid. The agency will continue to accept investigational new drug applications for studies to start, but everything's going to go slow. In addition, the agency is going to triage, another thing that's not talked about much, but uh, the last time we had a long uh, shutdown, 2018, 2019, the agency passed the word that they were going to prioritize medical products that were closest to market. So NDAs on which a user fee had been uh, already been paid got first priority. Uh, Products in phase 2, phase 3, nearing the end, those got the next most attention. And then INDs and preclinical meetings tended to get less attention. Uh, in a 30-day period, probably 3/4 to 75% of the work that would have been done will manage to get done on products. However, it goes way beyond that. The agency is fortunate in that 80% of the employees are retained and 20% are being furloughed. That's a big contrast, for instance, to NIH, which will be discussed in a few minutes, where I believe 24% are work will be retained and 70 odd percent will be furloughed. And there are reasons for that, dealing with FDA is an operational regulatory agency. NIH is a grant-making agency, et cetera. So what's going to happen? On the short term, products are going to continue to move. Whatever is in advanced stages of research, the ones that you're hoping for are going to clear out of the pipeline, are mostly going to move. The only exception would be products for which an NDA was ready to be filed, but it was not filed before the shutdown occurs. Inspections. The basic line is that uh, inspections for cause will continue and surveillance inspections will continue, but not routine inspections. Now, we don't really know what that means. For instance, for example, you can't get a drug approved unless FDA inspects the manufacturing plant. A little unclear. I think those will continue. Once you get down past some fairly general statements about who's working, who's not, we're left in a situation where there is not any granularity. So it's very hard to say. I mean, I spent the entire week answering calls primarily from media saying, is this open? Is this going to be closed? And the answer is the directions we've been given don't have enough granularity to answer that in most cases. Really, you can only do a broad sweep. Food safety, frontline inspections, again, for cause, for surveillance, for hotspots, problems, outbreaks. There will be inspections. Routine inspections will not continue. I think the rule of thumb there is the food system will be roughly as safe as it is today. We have the safest food in the United States, but the risk will increase. What I kind of urge people to do is exercise some kitchen consciousness, the things that you should be doing anyway in the name of food safety. But most of us figure, well, it's safe. We'll just, we won't worry about washing the lettuce another time, et cetera, et cetera. So for people asking that question, um, if food is still going to be safe, by all means, keep up your diet. COVID, the department and FDA have been explicit that COVID activities will continue. The implication is that there's enough no year money and what's called advanced appropriations, where programs have been funded in advance of fiscal year 24 for activities that can occur this coming fiscal year. And so those will continue. I don't expect any slackening of that. Pandemic readiness is going to continue. They've been explicit that all the work on drug shortages, I don't know if that's a concern for the MDA community, but drug shortage work will continue. Um, what won't happen is what happens when you take a agency that's understaffed and decide that 20% of people don't need to report. Uh, so everything suffers. It suffers unevenly because of user fees, because of advanced appropriations, because of things that are closer to outbreaks, closer to market, um, which will have the priority. There's one other thing that's really important to say about FDA, which is FDA is not only at risk during a shutdown because the American people rely on it for so many different things. But the solutions that are being discussed in the House are ones that would have terrible consequences for FDA. And when we get to NIH, the numbers are even bigger. Basically, the first level of compromise, um, let me put it this way, under the deal that President Biden cut with the House, while deciding that we weren't going to have a default, that the government borrowing could continue. That would roughly pay for most federal agencies to get about the same money in FY24 as they got in FY23. Part of what's happened is the House reneged on the deal, deference to the conservatives that Mark was discussing, and then uh, there's been one proposal for a continuing resolution that would be set at a much lower total spending level and would involve for FDA, NIH, and most domestic discretionary programs. Basically, everybody except DOD and veterans will get an 8% cut from the FY23 level. The latest round of possible CRs in the House would look at about a 14% cut from FY23 levels. Now, these numbers are going to get played around, and so, telling you even the round number, it really is not the point, and certainly not to the decimal point. What's important here is 14% for FDA, 14% from NIH, a catastrophe for the American people. They're a catastrophe for patients, both in terms of research, in terms of product approvals, in terms of food safety, and as you'll hear also in terms of payment programs. I think that, I guess one other larger thing just worth mentioning is that because both bodies allow um, individual members to slow the process, at this moment, I think categorically, neither the House nor the Senate, even if they had an agreement, could pass anything before Sunday because there would be enough dissent that members uh, would be able to slow the process down. And there are a number of members on the House side who basically said they would rather have the government shut down than pass a continuing resolution. That's kind of a hard position to negotiate with. Okay. Other thoughts, questions?
I think just to put a quick, summary type bow on it, the key takeaway here is where FDA is concerned, their activities with drug approvals will continue, but the farther away from the pipeline you get, the worse it gets over time. Is that an accurate summation?
That's a good one, yes.
All right, in that case, I think we're all set for the moment, and we'll see what comes in the Q&A box. Thanks, Steve.
Welcome.
So, turning from FDA to NIH, where we should start really is what even is NIH, just as a quick level set. NIH is a subset of the Health and Human Services Department, and their focus is they're essentially the government's research lab. So they're running clinical trials, they're running research through grants. I Googled what does NIH do, just as like what would a layman see if they were to Google it. And really the top line results for NIH that come up are how to write an NIH research grant, and that is because they are the holder of, as Stephen mentioned, they are a grant-based funding mechanism, and they hold a lot of money so that the government can fund and do research for furthering medical technologies and drugs and things of that nature. And so since NIH does receive its funding through grants mostly, their picture in a government shutdown is significantly different to FDA's. So HHS as a whole, as a large department, is looking at a 42% furlough rate, and NIH within that 42% is looking somewhere closer to 70%. This is using HHS's staffing guide that they recently published. So that's a huge proportion of workers that aren't going to be working once the government does indeed fully shut down. So what does that mean for clinical trials? The good news there is that any actively currently going clinical trial will remain moving for as long as there is money to fund that clinical trial, which is great news. The bad news is that the NIH can't then start any new trials because there isn't money for them to do so. So obviously that's not great for NIH. And then continuing on past clinical trials, there are a number of different knock-on effects for NIH. So probably the biggest one is community health center funds. So community health centers are health centers that do a lot of primary care and other things for those that need it, especially lower income folks. There are 330 health center grants out there in the world, and about 70% of funds go there through these grants. And so if those grants expire, then those health centers can't stay open and they can't continue to be providing care, which is obviously going to put a damper on people's access to basic healthcare. We've already really discussed clinical trials. And then the other big thing is NIH funds what's called PEPFAR, which is a emergency plan for AIDS relief. And there's some infighting happening around funding to things that would provide abortion care, which is partially what PEPFAR does. And so again, if funding gets cut off there, then all of those services that NIH provides within the vein of doing AIDS research and maternal care and things of that nature also stop. So the picture is pretty grim for NIH, which is partially why we're hoping that the government stays open. But the bright side takeaway from this is if there is an active clinical trial going, that clinical trial can continue. It's new clinical trials that stop. Mark, next slide. And Grace, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Grace Cranstover, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the Coalition for Health Funding. So if you can advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Coalition for Health Funding is the oldest and largest nonprofit alliance working to preserve and strengthen public health investment. So we're a coalition of 85 organizations across the country, and together we represent over 100 million patients, consumers, researchers, and professionals in the public health space. So our primary focus and our primary function is really to educate lawmakers on the importance of sustained investments across the continuum of public health. This means advocating for agencies such as the ones that we've talked about tonight, FDA, NIH, as well as others like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Indian Health Service, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and several others that really help create the public health continuum. So I included a picture of several of our members that participated in a Hill Day earlier this week, actually on Tuesday. And we were on Capitol Hill meeting with House members of the Appropriations Committee, as well as House Freedom Caucus members, to try and educate and talk to them about how a government shutdown would negatively affect their constituents, as well as public health overall. So getting our message out there and trying to encourage them to avert this shutdown. Let's go to the next slide. So tonight I've been asked to talk a little bit about the how a government shutdown would affect benefits, and I'm happy to share that I come with good news, and that largely government benefits such as Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security will be largely untouched. So CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, which oversees Medicare and Medicaid, will it will retain less than half of its staff and half of its employees during a shutdown. So this will mean that there may be folks going in, as Mark was saying, that will have to work. They're deemed essential, but they won't get paid. But the large majority of them will not be able to go in to work. However, Medicare benefits will not be affected, and Medicaid services and Social Security, as I said, have full funding for the next, or Medicaid, sorry, has full funding for the next 3 months. So that is certainly good news. And as was alluded to by Mark earlier in this webinar, certain administrative tasks may be affected. So in relation to Medicare, issuing replacement cards may be delayed, as well as benefit verification services as well. But overall, those regular services will not be affected. So in addition, though, I do want to touch upon some of the price negotiation items related to the Inflation Reduction Act, since that has been in the news lately. And a government shutdown could ultimately shake up the original intended timeline for Medicare to negotiate drug pricing. And this is because some drug makers, pharmaceutical companies, had or have an October 2nd deadline to provide data that would be essential for determining new prices to Medicare to use. However, this largely will not affect the public, since these drug pricing negotiations really would not take effect until 2026. So it may extend the deadline a bit, but certainly not any immediate effects. I'll also mention in relation to Social Security that, as I mentioned, it's safe from negative effects of a shutdown for now. Social Security is it's considered a mandatory program. And so that means that it doesn't adhere to the same funding cycle as agencies such as HHS and others are deemed to. So essentially, operations and funding don't stop for Social Security during a government shutdown, and anyone that receives checks and benefits from Social Security will continue to receive their payments during this time. So overall, I come with good news and share that benefits will be largely unaffected, save for those few administrative tasks here and there. That is it for me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Grace. Let's see. Just checking the Q&A box. So one question that Mark has been toiling over actually is, if someone has a question about Medicare, should they expect slower customer service on that?
I'd probably say yes. Some slower services, because that is the administrative side. However, overall services, you should not experience any sort of hiccups when you go to the doctor and receive care that way.
Awesome. One other thing that we did want to mention is just, what does this mean for MDA's other priorities? And honestly, I wouldn't anticipate a ton of our other priorities being terribly affected, other than our lobbying efforts and other efforts to Congress will probably be pretty significantly slowed because this is what they're going to be working on until the issue is resolved. So if I'm going to try to go to the Hill and talk to them about the ALS Better Care Act, they're probably going to say, hey, talk to me in the middle of October after the government's back open, that kind of thing. But in general, I wouldn't imagine that our priorities will be terribly affected.
I would just say, Joel, with that one, one that I hinted about it earlier, which is FAA reauthorization. So for folks who have come to many of our Advocacy Institute webinars, FAA reauthorization is a huge issue for us at MDA. And that expires the same time the government shuts down on the 30th. I would also say that it will be a slow-moving consequence for that as well. TSA workers will show up. Air traffic controllers will show up. They might have to lay off some trainees, which is not good. The FAA can't collect tax money, which isn't good either. But the air travel space will not shut down. But the longer this goes, it'd be the same as anything else. Folks might just not come to work, and you could start seeing delays. We've heard of airlines already having delays. Speaking of thinking about delays because of this. But I would say as soon as this is over, we will continue our work to pass a strong FAA reauthorization. That's not going away. This is for us hopefully a slight delay, but we will continue to work on that. But yeah, that is also tied into this, unfortunately. It's just how the politics has happened. So I just want to put that out there. But Joel's right. We'll continue to work until to get our issues, but things might be delayed as they focus on this and this alone. If anyone has any questions, we are running a little early, which is not bad. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. Or put them in the chat box. Either one is fine. A very quiet audience, which is okay. Omar has a really good question, and this might be a Medicaid question, which is any knock-on effects at the state level, like anything that the states might. What would the state? I'll open up to the panel actually. Thank you, Omar. I think What what would the states what effects could the state feel about this, or state governments could feel for a government shutdown? Any thoughts on that from the panel?
Well, I can think of, I'm sorry, Grace, go ahead.
No, go for it, Steve.
Okay, I can think of two immediate effects. In the FDA area, the agency has a very strong relationship with the states over the Food Safety Modernization Act and training of states and regulated entities within those states. And that program would probably cease until the shutdown. Again, we don't have the granularity to say for sure, but I would think those programs would be put in abeyance until the shutdown's over. I think the other thing that is important is states are, I imagine that in most cases, states are not going to get the grants that they're expecting to get in October. That might vary by function and by agency, by purpose, but I wouldn't be surprised if this goes 30 days, God help us. I wouldn't be surprised if you start to hear states complaining that they're having cash problems because federal grants haven't shown up.
Yeah, completely agree. I think we'll also, with agencies that will have truncated staff or skeleton staff, communication will be harder, certainly amongst state officials and federal officials. Certainly, grants will not be received, especially if they're new programs. There will be some essential services amongst states. I'm thinking of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Disease outbreak monitoring efforts will continue, for instance. Those are deemed essential. But for other non-essential programs between states and federal agencies where they work together. I can imagine that there will be a pause on those efforts.
Grace, actually, I have a question that I've been not sure of the answer, and I think Medicare may be and Medicaid may be the place where we'll find out. In the 2018 and 2019 shutdown, agencies were not updating their websites, and the staff that would normally respond to inquiries were not there. And now one of the questions I'm having is, compared to 4 years ago, so much more of FDA is submissions via portal, and I haven't yet figured out how much of any of that would be curtailed. How does that, do you have any sense of how that looks on the Medicare Medicaid side?
You know, that's a really good question. I would have to check for that sort of detail the plans that HHS has specifically for Medicaid and Medicare. The 2018 shutdown was certainly the longest, and so I would hope that there have been some learned lessons from that, especially as you mentioned, Stephen, if we go to the 30-day mark. Hopefully this is just a matter of a few days, and the House is able to come together with the Senate and pass something, even if it's, you know, just a short term while they work out their differences. But yeah, I can't say I have a definitive answer for you.
Okay, but it is, if you find out the answer, please send me a note.
Certainly.
It's important on our end as well. I also have to say, I'm a veteran of a number of these, and this has been the one that's hardest to figure out how to get resolved. So the history of these things is they usually get solved in a way you cannot anticipate on a time frame that you can't anticipate them, which is why, in theory, this could be over on Monday on something that none of us thought about. But I sense this one is the opposite, and it's really hard to see how they're going to find compromises, and especially from our point of view in the Health and Human Services community, the fact that the House's price is severe cuts to domestic programs has to be troubling. At this moment, obviously, we're rooting for the government to come back strong and perform the services we rely on. But if the price is an 8% or 14% cut in our programs, we may find ourselves rooting for it to go on, which is weird and unfortunate and unhappy.
So to that point, actually, John asks a great question in the chat, which is, if the shutdown does extend for months, will it affect Medicaid match?
So I'm trying to refer to my notes real quick because Medicaid has come out and stated that it does have full funding to function as is if there wasn't a government shutdown for the next 3 months. What happens after those 3 months, though, is unclear, and how exactly it would affect the program is unclear. It has never happened, so that's part of the lack of clarity, but we really don't want to get to the point where we start to see and have to start to consider that possibility. I think, as Stephen said, I have not been doing lobbying and government relations as long as Stephen has, but this is certainly a conundrum that we have found ourselves in, that I'm not quite sure how we will come out of it, but I just know that we have to come out of it somehow.
And just to provide a little bit of context, the longest government shutdown was 35 days. So hopefully we're not looking at months and months and months here. But it's good to know what the longer term impacts would be if we do get to some record-breaking number.
Another point that's worth mentioning that was raised with me today is that when we go back to full government funding, there's going to be a backlog. And so the offices you deal with, to the extent that they've been short personnel, won't be back where you would expect them to be day one or day two. Many of these offices will have backlogs that run the entire length of the shutdown. And because of synergies, there may be offices that a 1 month shutdown has created a 2 or 3 month backlog. Another happy prospect.
That's a really good point, as we talked about, not stuff gets stalled during this time period. They had to catch up, and that would cause even more further delays on new things. That's a good point, Stephen. Um, any final questions that we have for the panel tonight? Give it just a couple more seconds. As we wait for any more to come in, I just want to say if anyone has any questions from tonight, feel free to email us at advocacy@mdausa.org. If there's something that you think about over the night or over the weekend, feel free to give us an email. We will either answer it or find the person who can answer it for you, probably one of the folks on this panel tonight that can help us. So I'm not seeing any further questions tonight. So we want to thank everyone for joining us for this Advocacy Institute. Again, we hope this doesn't happen, but we wanted to at least get some guidance out in case it does. So with that, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. Again, if you have any questions, advocacy@mdausa.org is where you'll find us. And with that, have a great night, everyone, and thank you for joining us.